Hello and welcome back to another Team Juno tier list video. Today's video we're going to be joined by Angora, currently rank 1 of O, so we're going to be going over some of the items for the latest patch, 14.16. So here you can see we've made ourselves a custom tier list. This is loosely based off of stats as well as the fact that we've been grinding out a lot of games, and we've just made a tier list based on what items are slammable, manage good item economy, and also just feel good on the main carries of the meta. So Angora, do you want to start us off with S tier?
Yeah, I mean, in the S tier, like the items that you're always super happy to slam early game. Obviously, Rabadon's is hard to slam, but it's such a strong item. And then TG is just a good generic item for sort of any melee carry. And then Ginsu's super good on Rise, who's one of the premier carries right now, and on Callista, who's also good. And then Adaptive's nice and flexible, so that's always a nice early slam, and it's good on good backline and frontline, really good on Ari as well. And then Shojin as well, pretty good flexible item that you can sort of use on anyone. Yep,
so we can see from previous patch, a lot of those same items are kind of sticking around. I mean, we had Ginsu's and Shojin really high priority before, just because they were useful on a lot of the carries, but also just because of the Syndra meta, super strong. But now, you know, the Rabadon's priority a little bit higher, just because before Syndra just wanted was it attacks, like you just wanted to keep casting and keep generating stacks, but now the carries actually require raw AP, because a lot of the AP traits this set, they actually require base AP. So in previous sets, you know, you have like spell weavers and things that generate their own AP and they can just get away with the JG, but a lot of the AP carries this patch playing around, like scholars, they need raw AP. The Ari Zoe reroll scholars, you can play fast 8 into Rise, and then even if you do manage to make it to 9 and cap out with legendaries, like you're playing around what, Nora, Xerath, and they still all need a raw source of AP as well. Okay, so starting off with A tier, we have Warmogs, just generic good frontline. Regardless of what the types of defenses are, you're always going to be happy to just have a Warmogs on your frontline. Does use up 2 belts, so sometimes it can be hard to make if you do need anti-heal, but if you ever slam it, you're just always going to have value throughout like the whole game. And then Shiv's really good tempo if you're playing towards an AP line, especially with the portal opener, you're just going to get so much tempo from this item. And then it doesn't really feel horrible because both the components, like you can just flex around other components and the item economy is not horrible. And then BT, there's so many melee carries this patch, so just you're never going to feel bad about playing BT, because then when you do your roll down on level 8 and you're flexing around, like ideally Fiora, but also like Olaf can hold it and other bruiser carries are fine. And then you pretty much always want anti-heal this patch, and Morello and Red Buff are just great on any of the backline carries, because if you make Sunfire this patch, usually the frontline unit's just going to die. And a lot of the ranged backline units, the AD and AP lines, they can reach backline, so that's why you want the ranged units to have the anti-heal. And then Steadfast Heart and Gargoyles, just generic good frontline items. Steadfast Heart is really good for item economy, just because if you don't need the glove or chain, it makes your item economy so much better than Gargoyles if you're just playing around solo frontline, mainly just Wukong. Anything to add on to that, Angora?
No, I think the main one's just like in Portal, Warmogs and Gargoyle are definitely less value. That's more aimed towards, you know, like Narcissus or Wukong type frontlines. But yeah, other than that, these are the best items for frontline.
Mm-hmm. And then some of the like mid-tier items that you just kind of make when you have to. Do you want to talk about the B-tier ones now?
Yep, so we have Bramble. You know, there's more AD carries. It's definitely a more slammable item since chains don't really want to be used elsewhere. Protector's Vow is always a good late game tank item. Get an earlier cast on Tarek or Tom Kench or someone. Redemption's always pretty solid and always fine to, you know, get rid of the components if you're playing AD specifically. And then Crown Guard is just a okay item. I feel like it's nice and flexible. You can put it on like a Gwen or Katarina as like a secondary carry as well, so it kind of gets points there. Then Spark is always pretty solid. I think it's slightly worse than Shiv, so that's why it's in B tier. Blue buff is obviously super good on Zoe and Ari and, you know, Karma, the units that want it, but I think if you're not playing those lines, you almost never want to build it within Portal and the AD flex lines. It's just better to build different items. Then Steerax is pretty solid item on Olaf, Fiora, Briar, all those units. JG is definitely a decent amount better this patch. The carries just use it relatively well, and then a lot of the hero augments also want it. Namely Rumble really wants JG, Rabadons, and BT, otherwise he kind of does nothing. And then Last Whisper, sometimes you just need armor pin, so you have to build it. It's not bad. And Archangels definitely came up a lot this patch just because of Rise. You never want to build, you don't really want Shojin, these kinds of items, so it's a way to get rid of the tier, and it's also a late game scaling item, so really good for item economy, and then also the fights are long, so it's like the perfect item basically. And then Nash's maybe could be an A tier, it's pretty solid, but yeah, we've just put it in B.
Because we're playing around a lot more of these like AP lines, you're a lot more happy to have some of these like supporting AP items. Like you mentioned, JG's gone up a lot in the hero augments, but also just because you can play around it if you already have the raw base AP as well. So all just generic items that feel fine, but never a high priority. Okay, moving down into C tier, we have items that were there previous patch, but also some that have fallen off a lot in popularity. So Declaw actually received the nerf from its healing, I believe. So previous patch, it was really good at just shutting down the Syndra players and provided so much for your frontline. But now it feels like there's just a lot more AD in the meta. So if you do have to make a declaw, or worse, if you're actually picking up cloaks to make a declaw on purpose, it can really ruin your item economy, especially if you get more cloaks. And if you're playing in a mixed lobby, it feels like the declaw just doesn't even really do that much, and some of the units that are playing around AP don't even really get shut down by it, because like Rise still hits backline, and some of the other AP units as well. If you're just wrong side, it's not going to do that much. And then Hodge effectively is just a worse version of BT. The units don't really necessarily need the raw stats as much as they need the survivability from the shield of BT. And then Edge of Night is like a fine third item late game. Problem with it is it doesn't really provide any value in early to mid game, so you never really want it until you're later into the game. And even then, a lot of the units like don't really need it. For example, like Fiora and Olaf are generally pretty safe throughout the whole fight, so they don't really need the Edge of Night. It was a lot better on some of the reroll lines. And then I guess if you're eventually working your way towards Briar, it's fine, but making this item at any point in time when you're so far away from Briar just feels wrong. Runin's is actually acceptable this patch if you're playing around some of the Hunter units because of their raw AD being so high. It's a fine item on Olaf and Jinx, but it's usually not the item that you chase, it's just the item that you make for either tempo or you just make it afterwards. And then as we mentioned before, Sunfire probably the worst form of anti-heal, so you'd rather just have red buff or Morello. The Guardbreaker, I mean, it's fine, it gives damage amp, but same reason as GS, is it's just like a little bit of damage amp is fine, but there's so many other better items that you'd rather have on your carries that just give a lot more survivability or even more damage amp with the raw AP or the raw AD. So anything to add on to that, Angora?
Nah, C tier, it's pretty much the items that you just make when you're forced to make them. I think Declaw is just a lot worse, especially because the only units that sort of attack frontline that you would want Declaw verse would be like Ari or Zoe, and they sort of reduce the MR to nothing anyway and just dies anyway, so... Or obviously does true damage, so yeah.
Yep. And then do you want to introduce the final and worst tier items, D tier?
Yep, so D tier is basically the items that you very rarely want to make, like only if you sort of forced into making it. I think these items just generally don't provide much within the game and force you into a certain direction. For example, IE, you can basically only play Varus, I feel like. And even then, it's not like it's the main... It's not like you want to build IE first and feel super good about it. And then Titans is just... It basically is just an item that's okay with BT and that's sort of it. Gunblade is basically only good on Gwen, and I don't see a reason why you put it on anyone else, basically. DB just doesn't have a place in the patch or the set, I guess. And QSS does nothing. Even Shroud does nothing, so...
Yep. Probably something important to note with IE, the reason that it's so poor in the patch, despite the fact that we already mentioned that AD is actually on the rise and there's a lot of AD lines, is because of the main AD units. So if you're playing around either like Jinx or Olaf, their abilities are based on their auto attacks. So because their auto attacks can already naturally crit, all champions' auto attacks can naturally crit. The Infinity Edge is really there to make your spell casting crit. So unless you're playing around Varus, who is a caster and does most of his damage with his spell, the value you get from IE is really just the raw stats, and so it's not really doing anything. And yeah, Titans does have that nice synergy with BT, which is fine on units like Fiora. Like, you can make IE Titans if you already know you're playing around Fiora and have Fiora 2, but if you're making these items on like 2-1, you're really locking yourself into a narrow line. And the Hunters already get quite a lot of raw AD, so that's why the Deathblade is a lot lower, and like, it's a fine item on some of the blasters, but it just ruins your item economy because you'd rather use the swords on something else, and you don't really want to be picking up too many swords anyway. And then QSS, I guess, was usable on some of the reroll lines, so makes sense that it's not in flavor this patch, as a lot of them got nerfed and the meta got shuffled around. But yeah, that's it for all the items for this patch. Hope you guys enjoyed the tier list. Angora, any closing thoughts?
Make sure you build Infinity Edge, Titan's Resolve, Hextech, Gunblade, Deathblade, QSS, and even Shroud in my games.
Perfect. All right, until next time, see you guys later. Bye for now.
See ya.